Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mind Pump. In honor of the opening of the NBA season, we have one of the top strength and conditioning NBA coaches on our show, Corey Schlesinger. Now, he's going to talk about some secrets for performance for both elite athletes and for the average person. He also talks about a concept called microdosing. No, that has nothing to do with psychedelics. It's about a way of training that maybe you can even apply to your own training to get good results. Now, you can find Corey on his own Instagram at /strength. Also, don't forget we have short clips over at our other YouTube channel, Mind Pump Clips. Go over there and subscribe and enjoy the show.
Off air, we were talking about how competitive, and I told you, Mike, I had a high school girlfriend who went to college, ended up getting her degree in, I think, rec administration, ended up working for the Staples Center, hanging out with Kobe, Shaq, and all this. And me, like, being in my early 20s, just dreaming of something like that. And she told me, no, it's not what all it's cracked up to be. It's like, literally, it's hard. It's a lot of, because it's so competitive. Is it at all times, are there people eyeing for your job that are willing to come do it? Is that what it's
absolutely.
like?
I mean, I think there's people that would do it for free if they could. You know? So then I got to create a value system that goes, well, no, Corey's services are worth this. So we need to do this for him. But that's the idea. Is I'm telling you, like, it's really competitive. It's so cutthroat. And that's where I think you see it a lot in industries where there's like this safeguard, or there's this very conservative approach to how you do your job to maintain your job.
Oh, interesting.
And that's where it's like, you don't see a lot of people step outside the box or outside tradition because, you know, if you stick out like a nail, you're going to get hammered at some point, you know? So that's where, you know, like, you can be a trendsetter, but it's dangerous. I think it can be very dangerous.
Is there because it's so competitive, is there a, like, because I know in other organizations, maybe smaller organizations where, you know, coaches, strength coaches in particular, we're all in the strength space, I guess, or fitness space, lots of cross communication. This works, this doesn't work. I tried this new technique. Have you applied this? But at your level, so competitive, or is it more secretive? Like, I'll keep my tools to myself and you do your own thing and let's see what happens.
That's a great question. I look at it like this. Everything works. It really does. It's just progressive overload, right? But it's so contextual in the person that you're working with and the environment that you're in. And I think that's where everybody starts losing their mind, right? They try to develop these camps, and it's like, this way is the right way to do it. And then you can always fall back on that type of philosophy. But in reality, it's like, my philosophy is so flexible and pliable because of the athletes that walk into my room and their past. Like, you got to remember, I deal with athletes. It could be there for 3 months or they could be there for 5 years. So I got to know their training history and what they're comfortable doing. And really, it's like neck up. Oh, you're confident with, you know, a sumo squat or a sumo deadlift? I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to get somebody to progress on a sumo deadlift. But if that's what you've been doing and that works for you, absolutely. So that's where I don't think you can just lock yourself into like this philosophy to have that secret, like, oh, this is only what we do. And that's the reason why it's like, I always go, I don't care about sharing what I do. It's because of how I apply it and
that's
the context.
The real secret.
That's the secret.
Would you say that's something that separates you from a lot of your peers, or do you think that most of them think the same way?
Yeah, I think they think the same thing. It's just I'm just willing to share more, you know, and I think that maybe that's it.
Because before that, I mean, you just looked at it. I think a lot of strength coaches out there would look at a system as like, this is how we're actually like, basically like you're the coach of the team, like you're creating the system. Everybody has to do it this way in particular. And so then that kind of mentality went into the strength training program. So it was almost like the community workout as opposed to the individual focus. Would you say that's like a different?
So like, think about where strength and conditioning came from, like especially in team sport. It came traditionally through football, right? But those are the masses. Like, that's a lot of roster spots. But when you start trickling down to more like smaller team rosters, like 10 to 15, well, you can get a lot more individualized. And I'm not saying you can't do individualization with large numbers. You definitely can. But when I look at it from the basketball perspective, I mean, look at these dudes. Like, they're huge and they have different biomechanics. They have different structure types. They have different strategies on how they create their force. Yeah, you can get into the weeds on that stuff.
All right, today's giveaway again, because it's launch season for MAPS 15 Minutes. It's MAPS 15 Minutes. You can get it for free. This is the everyday workout program, which includes an advanced version. For those of you that like to work out with barbells and dumbbells, and you've been working out for a while, you work out every day for 20 to 25 minutes, check it out. Get it for free. Here's how. Leave a comment below in the first 24 hours that we drop this episode. Subscribe to this channel. Click on notifications. Do all those things. If we like your comment, we'll notify you only in the comment section that you won free access to Matt's 15 Minutes. Now, everybody else, because it's a brand new launch, if you sign up, you get it for $20 off. So the price is $77. Plus, you get 2 free ebooks included with this, plus the bonus advanced version. If you're interested, go to maps15minutes.com and then use the code 15special for the discount and the free giveaways. All right, here comes the show. You know, it's interesting. I remember having a conversation with another strength and conditioning specialist, and I said something like, and as a trainer working with everyday average people, you know, we focus a lot on correctional exercise and, their movement patterns need to be, move this way instead of that way or whatever. And he said, yeah, at this level, you don't do that. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, they've been playing for so long with whatever patterns they have. If I go and try to change those, they're not going to play nearly as well.
I could not agree more with that statement. The only thing I would change is if they're symptomatic or they have an injury history,
right?
Maybe they're manifesting that in a way that's not working out for them. But other than that, that's the best part about being in professional sports and watching these games night in and night out is you see the best athletes in the world just playing a sport. Like, they're still the best athletes in the world. They're just playing a sport. So when you watch them, like their strategies on how they do what they do, you see like such individualization. And when you see those kind of movement strategies, even though everyone's doing a Euro step, how they do that Euro step, when you watch it in real time, you're like, oh, back squats don't help everybody. You can't generalize exercise anymore.
Yeah. How do you, okay, so this has got to be such a hard decision for you, or a very technical thing to tease out. Like, so for example, you bring up a good point. Like, if let's say somebody has like this excessive, internal rotation on one side, on their left side or something, right? And therefore they're more prone to some knee and hip issues or something. So that. But then that torque also makes them more explosive when they go a direction. Like, how do you decide? Because I've seen examples of that, of where they'll break down like some super athlete, or like, and I'm thinking of a pitcher right now who's able to like throw like just abnormally fast, and they find out that's because they have this like little bit of internal rotation that's
some asymmetry.
Some asymmetry going on, but it works to their benefit when it comes to whipping a baseball. So how do you decide, like, okay, this is something that I'm going to leave alone, or this is something I want to fix?
Once again, it comes back to symptoms, but like that, you got to reverse engineer special athletes. Like, we used to, like in college, it was, get everybody progressively stronger at basic exercises and their athleticism goes up. Mm-hmm. Pretty cool. But when you're older athletes, now you're getting into your mid 20s, getting to your early 30s. Well, how much more strength can you rinse out? Like, I don't know how much more strength to go get to increase performance. Now, with that being said, when you're watching them create these forces, you go, well, back to your point, that's what makes them special. Now, if they're symptomatic, then we have to start looking at some other things. But when I see quote unquote valgus, which we can argue if it's valgus or not, when you see these knees collapse in, no, that internal hip rotation they have is special. And that's what allows them to have like these, you can go down the rabbit hole and like pressure gradients and, the PRI model if you want, but these physics that go into it that allows them to be like a super ball and just pop off the ground using not muscular strategies, but using like tendinous and ligament.
Yeah,
and then
torque.
they're so elastic.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, like, you're telling me weights is going to make that better? You're crazy.
They're literally outliers. It's funny. I had this conversation with my wife the other day because we were at this event, and there was this person walking by, and they had the legs of a 6 foot tall person, but they were like 5'9".
Oh, right.
And I said, I bet that person performs really well in running sports. I bet you they either run distance or whatever. So we had this conversation. I talked about Michael Phelps, and there was this great picture I saw years ago. Michael Phelps. They showed his leg length next to the world champion marathon runner. Now, the marathon runner was like 5'9". Michael Phelps is like 6 something. But Michael Phelps's legs are as long as the guy who's super short. I said his body's built to swim. This person's body's built to run. At the level that you train people, at that level, you have special differences, many of them genetic. So you can't necessarily apply what I would do for the average person, because It's not going to work for how different is that level? Because you trained at the highest level of college. How different is the level going from college to pro?
I mean, in every aspect different, but like you still see very similar body types. It's just, do they have enough skill? And that's where that one comes in. But to go back to the point you were making earlier, what I find is fascinating is the higher level athlete you work with, the more you regress exercises.
Really?
Oh, interesting.
Why is that?
Because I look at it like this. If they're creating these forces elastically, reactively, like you can't create those same forces in a weight room. I don't care how strong you are. Like watching some of these athletes do 360 dunks or backflip dunks, basically. I mean, they're doing the craziest stuff in the air, these aerials, and being able to drop their shin angle, like some of these guards that make them change direction. Like their shins are hovering over the ground. And when you see those angles, you're like, and those cuts, there's no way I can replicate that force in a weight room scenario.
That's true.
I can't add enough load. They'll crumble.
Not to mention if you load them outside of that range of motion, get them too strong, and then you ask them to go do that explosively, like
then you're taking them. So that's the thing I'm learning about myself and my own evolution of training was when I trained to be awesome, right? I wanted to be big, strong, look the part. Then I started realizing, okay, I live in external rotation. I live in supination. So now I'm doing all the things that's the exact opposite of what you need for jumping and change of direction. And you're like, oh, so like being cock strong might not be, in this context of lifting weights, might not be the best thing for high velocity, high speed sports. Now, with that being said, you do need to load. And that's where I go back to my point. You got to regress these exercises. And now it's like, okay, instead of taking a traditional heavy back squat, well, maybe it's just a leg press. Maybe it's a Smith machine squat. Wow. Maybe it's like take the learning curve out because all I want is the stress. I need to give them the stress to get a response to elicit an adaptation. I don't care what vessel it comes in.
So to put differently, you're taking the skill out of the strength training so that they could just focus on the tension.
Just on that, the mechanical load.
Yes.
But what I really find fascinating, and this is where my evolution is gone to, is now I take that skill component and I take it more to sport. So now I want that in movement strategies that's outside of sport.
Got it.
The gray area. Now
explain that.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll say the white area is doing the skill, like playing basketball.
Right.
Crossovers, jumps, aerials, whatever. And then the black area is resistance training. Well, there's that gray area that you can increase movement efficiency to increase movement capacity. And that's where it's, if they lack something, for example, they don't have a lot of good, or they don't have enough IR to allow them to change direction as well as they could. Well, what movement strategies can I build within that that allows them to move better and then get it in high velocities, but it also doesn't beat them up because we play 82 games in a year, right? Or regular season, 3.4, 3.5 games per week. How are you going to do that without beating them up? So now you got to hijack a lot of things. And that's where, I pull from everywhere. I pull from, and it's controversial in my space, but it's like Franz Bosch. I like a lot of his stuff. Like some of his stuff makes a lot of sense. But then I look at ballet. I look at freestyle wrestling. I look everywhere to look at what angles do those guys create, because for them to be successful in their sport, I need the same in mine, but I can't do what they do on the court because that takes that taxes them. So how do those guys train? And then I try to incorporate with our athletes based off their structure and based off their strategies.
That's really interesting. I'm just racking my brain on this in terms of like that high level of an athlete. Like, are you a little bit more focused on like decelerating type movement as opposed to, because obviously they've mastered that ability to create and generate force and torque and get into these explosive movements, but the control of it at this level and the stability of it, is that like even more of an emphasis that you have in your programming?
That's such a good question. The way I look at it is you got to give them what they don't get. So for example, they already do a ton of plyometrics. Like let's remove what sport is for a second. And like, we're not tallying scores anymore and we're not competing against one another. Let's just look at what they actually do on the court.
Yeah, their whole game is plyometrics.
The whole game is plyometrics. And the whole game is hand combat. And the whole game is bodying somebody up and then moving in the frontal plane in a certain way. Like remove all that and then look at the sport for what it truly is and go, probably don't need to do a lot more of that because they already get that. So back to your point, yeah, it makes a lot of sense to do decelerating work. Now, how you do that really depends on the impact that it can have on the athlete. So when I say impact, it's like high level plyometrics, like playing the sport, is very impactful. Like it has a ton of impact on the joints, ligaments, tendons, etc. So when I do eccentric training, like I got to think one or two things. Am I doing it for high velocities or am I doing it for strength? And so utilizing means like high eccentric drops. Like I got credit for this movement called a kettlebell drop lunge. So basically you start with it tall, you hold it in between your legs, and then you drop down and catch it, and then you can do it rhythmically. Yeah. And so what that does, it doesn't beat up the joints, but it's high velocity eccentric training. Also, there's rhythm and coordination. There's a lot of aspects that is sport. And so that's where you can get a lot of eccentric load, but it doesn't beat them up. Also on the same token, you can do a lot of tempos where you take, for example, like a Bulgarian split squat, tempo that, 3 seconds, 5 seconds on the way down, 1 second pause, explode up. Now I'm training the eccentric portion. I'm just doing it through a different means. There, I'm chasing physical adaptations. Like I'm chasing, hypertrophy, things that you see in bodybuilding. So
now I've seen a bit of a trend in strength training in terms of like the platforms and the different angles and being able to kind of place the ankles a little more in, supinated or a different type of a position, pronation, where you're trying to create and control that kind of force. Now, explain to me, like, how is that something like you're incorporating now? I've seen this in a few different modalities out there for athletes. Like,
I think,
where's the thought process in that?
So like Polish boxes, for example, for the audience, the Polish box is really simple. It's a plyo box, except they have slants. So in other words, it makes like a roof, like a house, or it makes like a ditch. So it goes basically a triangle or a reverse triangle. And then they have different grades that allows certain responses. So what I like doing with them is doing low level plyometrics or extensive base plyometrics, where you're jumping on this ramp, but your feet are going into supination, and then doing the exact same thing, jumping straight up and down. Even though we're jumping straight up and down, my feet are feeling supination and pronation. So same things that I get in change of direction. The one thing that you see in change of direction drills, who does change of direction drills like extensively?
What type of athlete?
Yeah, or I'm just saying like who trains that extensively? That means like you'd be going back and forth cutting for a long period of time. Most of the time when you see change of direction drills, tennis is, you see that in the sport, but that's like at high levels in basketball.
Right. You don't see that in a normal person.
Exactly. But when you're seeing it in training, then you're like, oh, no one just goes back and forth and does a ton of change of direction. Like they don't sets and reps that necessarily. So when I think, well, how is they're training their foot and ankle to handle change of direction? They don't even build a general base for it. They just rely on the sport to make that happen. So how do I get long, like the best way to look at it is like GPP for the lower leg for change of direction. Like how do you get that? And a great way of doing it is just jumping on plyo boxes, where you have these ramps and it forces your foot to have supination and pronation aspects.
Speaking of which, this was very interesting. I'm not a huge basketball fan, but I'm a huge fan of athletic training. And it was, I don't know, this was maybe a few months ago, we were all watching basketball on TV, and I noticed something, and only because I don't normally watch it. And I said, man, nobody's wearing high tops like they used to back in the day. Everybody's got like these mid tops or low tops. That seems like a big change, because when I was a kid, everybody wore high tops. Why did that change? What was it? Now, my guess was you just have more movement and mobility, and it probably, although this may sound counter, probably reduced injury because you're not so limited. But am I right? What was the deal?
My understanding is it started with Kobe. I think Kobe was the first one to.
That's a prevailing theory that I've heard.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that his injury after that, he started the whole trend of the lower shoes.
The lower, yeah. So that I don't know how true it is, but he is one of the first that I've ever seen go low top and everybody buy it. Like everybody jumped on that train because they were like, oh, it's Kobe's and they're cool. But from my understanding, what went into that was his experience as a soccer player. And when you watch soccer, there's no high tops in soccer.
Right.
What, like, to me, like, I thought that was fascinating because you got spikes.
Yeah, you're planted
all
even harder
direction with a fucking ball.
And you're on one leg half the time.
Dig into the surface though too a bit.
I was like, those are the guys that are going to get jacked up the most. And then you watch DBs, running back, or not running backs, but like DBs and wide receivers, and those are skill positions.
I never thought
They
of that.
wear low tops as well.
yeah.
So when you think about it, it just makes a lot of sense. I think it was just shoemakers at the time, trends, like just things that just at that point made sense, but really wasn't validated. And that's the thing that I was talking about earlier, is like, if you step outside the box, sometimes, I mean, it's high risk, high reward, but sometimes it can fall on your face too.
Speaking of evolution, the evolution of strength training in basketball, I find absolutely fascinating. I think that's probably one of the last sports to really adopt. I mean, of course, they all use it now, but it was probably one of the last sports to really adopt strength training, football being the first. When they first adopted it versus now, what do the evolutions of strength training look like, and how's the athletes change? Because I remember them, I want to say in the 90s, early 2000s, they were big. They were trying to get them real big, and now maybe they're much more svelte. Like, what's the deal with the evolution of the strength training?
Man, I remember. So I played college basketball, like the lowest level of college basketball. So that was 2005 to 9, and so even that small like evolution from then, like it was almost like don't train in season because it's going to mess up your shot. That was one that I was like, Jesus,
That was a big one.
You know, now I look back on, I'm like, that's probably one of the most ridiculous things that you can ever say. But at the same time, it also makes a lot of sense because what was adopted, it was football training principles.
Yeah.
They're adopted into basketball. So if you go and do a heavy bench press session and then you go shoot immediately after, I agree. That is not good. That is not good at all.
Changes your timing and everything.
100%. Like that feel, like there's nothing like the feel. And that's when you see like the best basketball players, when they shoot the ball, there's something, it's just so special. The way it comes off the fingertips. I mean, I will shoot for the next 10 years and I still can't even come close to that kind of touch. You know, and it's just something when you see that and you go, oh, strength training, like types of strength training, it actually makes a lot of sense. And so anyways, back to the evolution. So it was basically don't train in season, just only maybe do it off season. But it was that. It's like, let's get these refrigerators. Let's try to make the biggest possible athlete that we possibly can. But the sport was that. Like the 90s was beating and banging down low.
Yeah.
Right? And now it's so much more finesse. So it's not only like, and this is the part that we can't compartmentalize, you know, training. It's also style of play. You know,
What a good point.
Think about football back, you know, I mean, there's still like, you put a bunch of heavy linemen up front and they can't move really well, but they're just really strong and it's run up the gut, you know, a wishbone or whatever you call it. There's all these types of offense. And I remember helping out in college football early in my career where they actually wanted more mobile linemen. So now that you have more mobile linemen, you got to change the way you train. I think that's what happened in basketball. The style of play changed, thus the need.
100%. I mean, you're explaining. Look at what happened in wide receivers in the NFL. I mean, the part of why we see like the Tyreeks and these guys that are so fast now is they can be petite and small and quick like that. You play football in the
successful.
80s. Yeah, you play football in the 80s. You're getting jacked up if you're that little. So 100%. The game has changed too.
I mean, when you see the rules change, like the rules now, you know, you can't touch certain ways.
Protected.
Well, then what wins? Speed.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's like, maybe I put more eggs in that basket opposed to being as physical. And so that's when you see now the 3-point shot is now like basically from half court. It's like, that's why some of these guys can get away with it at a super high level where speed really wins. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like there's all sorts of tactics that go into it and the development and the structure or the DNA of your team, I should say. But it's really fascinating to see what really wins. It's fast pace or physicality. So it's always fun to see when those two teams match up.
I'd love to hear some personal experience for you. I mean, you were already coaching at a high level at Stanford. Then you go to the NBA. Would have been some highlights and moments like watching the game and watching these super athletes. Like would have been some cool highlights for you.
I mean, the finals was special.
Yeah.
Like it was probably, and obviously we lost, but the coolest thing was watching them celebrate. And I know that sounds really weird and it's like untraditional for us to like, but when I watched it, it was like, dude, this is the highest level of achievement. We were just on the other side of it.
Yeah.
But I'm like, dude, I'm still in this building and I'm like from Redneckville, you know, USA. And I get to just stand here and watch this confetti drop. Now, obviously I would love to see our colors drop, but just even being in that moment, it's like, we're the last two teams. And this was,
It's like achievable. It's there.
It was so special.
Well, also, what is it like? Because unfortunately, I have never been able to experience playing for or being a part of a team that made a championship run. talk about the culture of it, because I mean, even not ever experiencing that, there's when you have this this dynamic. Like, did you know early in the season? I mean, could you feel the energy?
No.
No.
That's the best part.
Shut up, really.
That's the best part. I've been a part of 3 different championship teams, and what's interesting is every one I can look back on, it was like, oh, we actually did it.
Wow, really?
You don't know it while you're in it. I don't think you know it when you're in it. I think this is what we do. And it just so happens to go our way. I really think, like, don't get me wrong, there's that mentality. Yeah, we're built for this. We're built different. Like, I get that. Like, there's that facade. There's that, that confidence you have to externally show. And yeah, we knew this was happening. Well, sure. But the reality is, like, can everybody pinpoint that moment where we're like, oh, it's here? I mean, you can fascinate some stories, but reality, I mean, we were coming off the bubble. The bubble was 8-0, very successful. That was our own little championship. But we're like, hey, we belong. That didn't necessarily go, we belong in the finals. Like, that's a big difference. Like, you win 8 games in a row, great. But like going to the finals the next year, that's a big leap. And that was, I mean, our first round was extremely tough. But I would say if I had to like pinpoint like a fantasy moment to say, hey, we can do this thing, like we're doing it, was after the first round win. After the first round win, that was the first time the organization's been in the playoffs for 12 years, I think.
Remind me who you played in the first round that year?
Lakers.
Oh, okay.
Lakers.
So of course.
So that was where, that was a team that was projected to do it all.
Of course. So
after we did that one, we're like, oh gosh, like, I'm not saying like we arrived, but it was like, no, we're here. Like, we can do this.
Well, let's talk about the bubble, training the bubble. What did anything change, or was it just business as usual?
Oh no, everything changed. Like it was because of the environment. So we were under extreme constraints. I mean, obviously with the testing, everybody's in their own hotel rooms. I mean, when we first got there, we had to quarantine in our hotel for like 3 days straight. I think it was something like that. So
you couldn't bring family or anybody, or could you? But then they had to also quarantine.
Oh no.
So by yourself. That's
yourself. Now I think the finals, I think they were allowed to bring family, but they still had to quarantine just like how we quarantined,
Wow.
So, but to finish off the regular season, I mean, we had to be there 3 days isolated in your room, and that was bananas. But like, I'm sending guys workouts via FaceTime, or text, and then I'll FaceTime them like form check or whatever you want to call it. And it was wild times. And so when we finally got released, it felt like, like coming out into the public, we finally got released to do things together. We were slotted times because we all had to share facilities. So I don't remember how many teams, maybe like 19 teams were in it or something like that. So we had only so many facilities to have practice, have weight room access. And so everyone was slotted, I believe it was anywhere between 2.5 to 3 hours. And then you had to get up out of there. And so like, where are you going to train? And so what do you got to do? So in most scenario, you can do a lot of personal training. You can do one-on-one training. But because of that constraint, what we decided to do as a team was, we're going to do a team lift. And that was where it was like college days. And that got me, that's my wheelhouse. So running that whole program, like a college program, that was the most fun. If I can pinpoint like one special moment in my career, like you said, that was, looking back on that, it was dope because you got the best athletes in the world and it's like marching to the same beat.
Yeah.
And we're all in the weight room and it's like trap bar deadlift day and everybody's treating it like it's a max day. Coaches in there, we're all yelling and it's like a football environment. We're like, yo, like this is in the NBA. Like this ain't college football. Like, it was cool. And then it just so happened to have success. So
do you not think that some of that bled into the next season as far as like that camaraderie and everything that you probably built during that time, you think?
How we trained actually transitioned into that. And so what we trained before that, like, I didn't even know what the NBA was like. I was just winging it. Like, I mean, we're all winging it to a certain degree, but especially during that first half of the season before the pandemic hit, I was like, I think we're going to train now. Do you want to lift today? Like, I didn't really know how to, because I'm used to saying, all right, this is what we got. Yeah. We'll be here at 8. But at that level, it doesn't really work that way. It's your coworker. You don't like talk to your coworker that way.
Yeah, like they're a student.
Yeah, it's not authoritarian.
Did you get a lesson in that? Like, was there your?
No.
You come in already wised up.
I came in. I was like, you know what? Like, I know what I feel the vibe. Like, just be cool. Like, be cool. And then the moments that you gotta like put your foot down, just be like, yo, what are we doing? Like, talk to him like as it's your boy. And you're like, I'm disappointed in you. Like, not like, get out of my space. Like, you can't pull that stuff. Like, I mean, you could, I mean, I think if you're close enough, there's times where I'm close enough with a player where I can like be
Get into
old Corey.
because you know them.
Yeah, because we're cool, like, and they know that I have the best interest for them.
Right.
If it's not, then it looks like it's self-interest. And at the end of the day, like these guys get paid what they get paid, and I get paid what I get paid. So if there's controversy, who's gonna kick rocks first? You know what I'm saying? So
Now you mentioned off air that knowing what you know now, you have this great experience at the high level at college, now MBA. Now you say if you were to go back and do college, you'd do it differently.
yeah,
How so?
I would do it so different.
Wow.
So one thing that we did in college, specifically at Stanford, that I really enjoyed was we implemented this model called microdosing.
Yeah.
And so microdosing performance, I think we talked about
I
it on
remember
the
I went
last-
up. I was gonna bring that up. I'm like, you were doing revolutionary stuff at Stanford. So how would you like change all that? It was already
So-
next level.
Well, the good thing is I got to bring that to the professional environment. And so now it was like a comparison. It wasn't not a intentional comparison, but the difference is I would do multiple sessions in a day. That's what I would do very different.
So explain microdosing to the audience who didn't
For sure.
listen to that first episode.
Great point. So microdosing in a team sport setting and in-season training, you generally see teams lift 1 to 2 times a week. And the problem with that is, let's say somebody misses a lift, then that's 50% of your training gone. 50 to 100% of your training gone for that 7-day period, which is a huge problem. Or you got to make it up. Now, if we're just saying, here's a good example, in conference play, you play Thursday and Saturday. So if I miss a lift, well, I can't make up that lift, especially the exact same type of lift to elicit an adaptation, because what that's going to do is going to put me in the hole, and now I can't have optimal competition.
Right.
Or be ready for competition. So then you're now negating and like doing like a half-ass job or training stimulus just to get the lift in. So that was the problem I had. I was like, you know what? There's not enough opportunity because we try to condense this whole session. And so these sessions in season would look anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour long. And so when you think about it, you probably surf the force velocity spectrum. So you start with your warm up, your speed or power work, your strength work, and then your accessory work. That's a typical lift. Well, if you layer all these different types of stressors into one lift, yes, you could get a positive adaptation, but with that positive adaptation also is going to have other aspects like delayed onset muscle soreness. So if we have some of these, unwanted symptoms, then that's going to affect player development. That's going to affect skill development. That's going to affect practice. That's going to affect competition. So what I thought about was, well, instead of doing these like mega dose sessions, like an off-season workout length, let's do a micro session. So now let's split these lifts into anywhere between 15 to 25 minute sessions. And then instead of doing all of those stressors in one lift, I'm going to separate.
Yeah.
I'm going to separate every one of those stressors. And what I found out is I can train not only more often, but more intense. Because think about it. If you went to the gym and all you had was cleans, all right, you got 20 minutes to get cleans in. You could get as heavy as you possibly could, and you could fail. You're probably not going to feel it the next day. So you're like, oh, but where did it all come from?
Yeah, because there's that cumulative stress. It's not just the
Yes.
acute stress, right? It's the cumulative over time.
Bingo.
I experienced this myself. I did these all day workouts where I'd lift 1 hour for 20 minutes, then I wouldn't work out for 2 hours, and I'd do it again 20 minutes. And I did this all day long. When I looked at the total volume, like this is way more than I would ever do in one workout, but it didn't feel like it.
1,000%.
Yeah.
And where did that all come from? Well, like Olympic lifters, they
Yes.
train multiple times a day.
That's how they train.
And so I found the Norwegian project. Are you guys familiar with that?
No.
So this was the Norwegian powerlifting team, I believe. They took on this Olympic lifting coach. I forgot where he was from though. Somewhere Eastern Bloc. And anyways, he's an Olympic lifting coach, comes over to the Norwegian powerlifting team and introduced Olympic lifting training frequencies to the powerlifting. Now, this is already an elite level powerlifting group. All they did was make more sessions. They just they doubled their training frequency within a week. So instead of doing 3 or 4 lifts, they did 8 to 9 lifts. And
And they corrected for volume and all that stuff. Or
it was the same load, same workload. So in other words, like, yes,
Okay.
they corrected the volume, but they were just in these micro sessions.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, boom, PRs. And you're sitting there like, that makes a lot of sense.
I'm experiencing this right now. We just created a program that we're launching next month, and I basically have taken the 3 big workouts that I used to do, and I've split it up over like 6 days in these 20, 25 minutes and experiencing incredible results. And I feel better than I ever felt. My joints feel better. I'm recovering faster. I feel just as strong. The results are as good or better. It's amazing.
I think for strength training, intensity tends to be overused or abused, and frequency in this way tends to not get looked at.
100%.
And I think if you look at frequencies this way, you'd be amazed at how your body tends to react and respond.
How it happened at Stanford was really simple. Like we come in, before we got to Stanford, we're at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. And like, it's blue collar, and, we had success with that. So we're trying to bring this blue collar mentality into Stanford, which is very white collar. And we're like, well, lifting every day is pretty tough. like it's like, that's hard, let's do that. And so how I pinned it off was, let's make it a part of practice. So lifting and practice are not 2 separate events. Mm-hmm. And it was also another aspect was when you look at stress holistically, if you have separate sessions throughout the day, well, logistically, that's 15 to 20 minutes of commute time.
Yeah.
And now like we're wasting their day because they have to more commutes.
Sure.
So our idea was like, instead of doing like that same rudimentary, like, all right, everybody on the line, let's do this 5 to 10 minute warm up and everybody's doing the song and dance before we go into our practice. Let's make it a strength warm up or a power warm up.
Oh, interesting.
And so now it's a weight room session. So our warm up is actually done in the weight room. Now we contrasted some sprinting and we did some specialized things where we go from a squat to a jump or a trap bar deadlift into a sprint, whatever. But they got to experience those high velocities and change the direction to prepare them for sport. But then we microdosed. And so that's where we trained on game day. And that was weirdly like revolutionary in college basketball at the time, which I'm like, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but it caught a lot of credit. And so then taking that now to professional sports. So what I did there was we only trained 1 time a day in college. What we do in professional sports is we train anywhere between 2 to 3 times a day.
Wow.
And I know that sounds wild. It really does. But when you do it in these micro sessions, it makes a ton of sense. So let's just take a game day, for example. Most teams have what they call a shoot around. So that's, around 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock during the day. They go to the arena, get shots up, maybe do some tactical stuff where they're looking over the thing that they're about to do to the team that night. And so that's an opportunity, pre or post that. And then you have the game, pre or post that. So you have 4 opportunities to get lifts in. And so if we break them up into these micro sessions, then for instance, you can do accessories in the morning, wake up, then you do your tune up or your turbo, like we're trying to get fast. Before the game, potentiation, and then post game, engine. Like this is where we're going to work on tensile strength post game.
Wow. Did you get any so there was a viral video. You were in it.
Oh God!
There was a viral video that
was
you
so
were
bad.
That you were in, and I was like, oh shit, there's my boy right there. Because anyway, I think it even made TV everything of you training with the guys. Yeah. I think after one of the was it one of the playoff games?
It was after
a season game.
It was after the Bay Area team.
Oh, maybe that's why I remember. Maybe that's why I remember it.
It was after that win.
So tell me first of all, explain to the audience what that was and what happened, and then I didn't know if you got any backlash from it or anything.
Yeah, it was catch-22. It was good and bad.
Okay, let's hear
the good part was it's exposing the rest of the world that basketball players lift weights, and like we take care of our bodies, and this is how we take care of our bodies. We don't do it by doing passive modalities. We're not just sitting there and getting massage treatments and getting these spa like sessions. No, we work. Like we do what we can to build up our bodies, and the best time to do that is technically post game. The reason why I bring that up is going back to the example where you play 3 to 4 times a week. Well, if you lift heavy to have an adaptation on any of the other days, so the rest days, well, holistically, stress is still really high. Yep. So they never get to recover. So the idea behind microdosing truly is make your high days stupid high, and so that your low days are ridiculously low, and so that you can recover. And that's the idea behind it is once you build up into this or once you adapt, then at the end of season, you're setting PRs. Like you're the strongest at the end of season. Wow. That's the whole point of this thing.
What a trip.
I mean, we had guys that were being able to express force on our force plates, and we have data to support it, that they're setting lifetime PRs going into the playoffs.
Wow.
That's so
crazy.
counter.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because the old school mentality
Peak
is
before the season.
yeah, just peak before the season and just make sure they don't get hurt.
Yeah, just sustain
It's so
that.
funny how you look at it and you're like, well, when does people get hurt? They get hurt in the beginning of season, probably because there's such a acute response to all the things they've been doing, and at the end of season. So what do you think happened?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
like you peak early, all right, you've done a lot of training up into that point. Then you add on high volume practices, and then you add on games. Boom, something happens.
Yep.
And then you look at the end of the season, you detrain because you're not training at the intensities that you were training. So you're actually getting less of an athlete.
What an
less
interesting
force.
perspective on that.
And
Yeah.
so counter. So let's talk. So here's something that I noticed with these all day workouts.
Wait, I wanted to
and
hear the
would-
controversy. You didn't
Oh,
make it-
yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Let me hear the shit, bro. You let
So
him get
the
away with
problem
that.
was,
positive,
so
yeah.
what we were doing in that session where we're doing oscillating isometrics. So what that is you go to the bottom range and we're just pulsing at the bottom. It's really, really good for tendon health.
Okay.
So then the internet personal trainers are like, oh my God, they're not even going full depth. They're not even doing full range of motion. And I'm like, out of all the lifts, that's the one, banging out great looking pull-ups though. I was pumped about that. I was like, yeah, we do that. But the pulsing isos got so much controversy. And I'm like, oh my
What is
God.
this jazzercise stuff?
The facts, and the problem is you see me doing it right beside a guy, like showing him, and it was like, oh, look, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I'm like, word. All right.
I think
Leave it to the internet. You know?
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
it's important for trainers and coaches to know that when you're training the average person, it's very different at what you look at. It's very different how you train the person. The higher the level, the more specific and specialized. And when you're training at the highest level, it's going to look nothing like you would train the average person. Even if you train a fit average person, it's going to look nothing like it. And this took me 10 years to really learn as a trainer because I would be critical too. What is that? It's not a full squat, or why aren't they doing full range? In 10 years of my career, I was like, oh, that's not the same at all. It's very different. It's very specific.
I had the exact same when I was in college, and I got asked on a lot of podcasts when I was working in those ranks, oh, would you ever do NBA? And I'm like, no, they don't train. Like, I had the same mentality. I'm like, nah, man, like I wouldn't do NBA, and look at my ass now.
Yeah.
Like, just trying to figure it out.
So I have a question for you because I can't quite figure out why this happens. I'm pretty sure you know the answer to this, but when I would do those all day workouts, this is how I would break it down. I do like 3 exercises, 2 or 3 sets each, bench, bench, deadlift, overhead press or something like that. And I do a couple sets at 9 a.m., then again at 11 a.m., then again at 1 p.m. And I noticed in the middle of that whole thing, because I'd finished at like 6 p.m., by the 3rd or 4th session, I felt stronger than I did at the beginning. Even though I should be fatigued, even though I've just done 2 or 3 micro workouts earlier, I noticed I got stronger and stronger and stronger, and then fatigue would set in the last 2 or 3, I'd start to get weaker. Is that like a potentiation thing that's going on? Is my CNS ramping up? Like what's happening?
I think there's multiple things going on, and I like to pair it with another example. So when you talk to any basketball player and you ask them when they got their first dunk, they would always say, yeah, after pickup. And you're like, that makes a lot of sense actually, because there's this aspect when we create so much tension to elicit a certain, movement pattern, rather it's slow like a heavy deadlift or fast like a sprint or a jump. There's this aspect of, or there's this sweet spot where you turn on the right muscles and turn off the right muscles. And there's this coordination to it. And so I think when you get into your sets, you actually start getting more and more coordinated throughout the day.
The efficiency is just
Exactly.
So
Because
interesting.
that's all expression of force is efficiency.
Yeah.
And so, now don't get me wrong, like, there's probably opportunities where guys like have their best jump in the beginning. Well, for sure. But there's like a lot of other things that could be involved in that as well. But most basketball players, I mean, I'm telling, I've asked this question to
You just
many.
made me think back to the very first time I ever dunked was after 2 hours of a pickup game.
There you go. And you just created so much efficiency. And so like when
That's
fatigue is actually like a good indicator of efficiency. And so that's where I think a lot of people look at fatigue as a bad thing. I look at fatigue as a great thing because you look at one or two things, like there's movement competency or there's movement inefficiency. And so that's where it's like, oh, do you truly master it? Can you still express these outputs even though you're under fatigue? Because that's how you organize. And when you see it in sport, that's when you're like, oh, that's where like you see crazy fourth quarter performances. Sometimes you see great first quarter performances, but
Right.
It's like your body is fine tuning and becoming more organized.
Bingo.
It's interesting.
Calibrating.
There was this old show, I think it was on Discovery Channel, where they would attach sensors to athletes and have them perform certain
sports
athletic
science
feats.
show?
I think it was, and they had Randy Couture on there. I don't know if you guys know who he is, but MMA.
Yeah.
fighter.
Remember we interviewed the guy from that show.
Yeah, and he Randy Couture, he got this medicine ball type thing with all these sensors attached to his body and the medicine ball registering force, and he squeezed it like in a headlock, and he compared him to the average person. And they found that his muscles were activating and coordinating very differently. And so he was able to squeeze it harder and longer than somebody who was actually bigger than he was. But it's because of the efficiency his body was, just through training and practice. And,
100%.
And that's really what it all boils down to.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up that point or that specific story, because I think the most important part of microdosing is how it doesn't compete with other stressors. When we look at stressors holistically, let's look at, okay, if I'm developing skill, well, that's motor learning.
Yeah.
I mean, motor learning exists in lifting as well, but let's just compartmentalize it for a second. So motor learning, skill development. Then we look at physical training. We're getting the muscles bigger, faster, stronger, right? And then we look at the sport itself, and that's the reactive component and the actualization of everything. Well, the problem is if physical training has these negative effects in these mega dosages, well, how do you think that's going to affect motor learning and skill development? So that's the thing I don't want to do. I want to increase their physical capacity, but I cannot do it to the point where it sacrifices skill development and competition. All three of these areas have to coordinate together and be able to be in sync. So that's where if you take certain aspects, like going back to the example, speed and power, heavy lift, or strength, and then accessory work, if you just compartmentalize those and you organize it along with their skill development, then you'll never compete against those stressors.
So really, the benefit, the value, the effectiveness of microdosing training is less about what it's doing and more about what it's not doing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So you're not competing as much. You're not forcing the body to adapt or to choose where it's going to adapt and to choose where it's going to move its resources. And here's the key with this, and I think a lot of people need to realize this, is when you're equating total volume, total work, it's pretty similar if you have 2 long workouts versus 4 small ones or 5 or 6 small ones. The difference is in what you're talking about. Because you're doing those frequent kind of signaling with smaller sessions, you're not doing maybe as much damage, not fatiguing the body as much, and allowing the person to train with less injury, less pain, less all that stuff.
I mean, it's really just not messing with what they do.
Yeah.
And I think we get away from that sometimes because it's about what we do. Like strength and conditioning coaches, I got to get them bigger, faster, stronger.
Yeah.
Well, okay. But if they're not a better basketball player, then none of it matters at all.
It doesn't matter.
And that's what I had to, if I could go back to college, I would do different. Now, at the same time, there's 17 to 21 year olds, they adapt to anything. So it really doesn't matter. But I would be a lot more like scalpel than I would like hammer, like I was in college.
So would you have added more workouts then to your college group? And then I would take that even just out of my own curiosity from the high school level, because I'm working with athletes there specifically, just in terms of like creating these microdosing workouts, but then also moving that same method in season and keeping and maintaining that alongside the stress of them, the volume of their actual sport itself. Like that would have been something you would have changed.
Yeah, I would have done. Now back to the Stanford example. The last thing I wanted to do is have them come in multiple times a day. I would lift pre and post practice. Pre-practice is more speed, like motor coordination, like things that
Turn things on.
Turn things on, and then like you're going like this is if it's a sprint workout, like it's a sprint workout. If it's to jump higher, I mean we're doing like high plyometrics. Because what's the worst thing after that? Practice. Like you're not going to experience anything as harsh. Now there's some reactive components that could get you close, but regardless. And then post practice, as long as practice is done well and
now it's traditional strength training.
Then
afterwards.
Traditional strength training.
Wow. Now what about isometrics? You mentioned the pulsing in that video. Where does isometrics I feel like is one of the most underutilized training methodologies in just general fitness. And the studies on them are pretty remarkable. It's doesn't damage the body. The injury risk is really low. Activates lots of muscle fibers. I mean, you can apply isometrics to anybody, almost anybody, regardless of fitness level. So I would imagine that this is something that you utilized with your athletes as well.
It is the bee's knees in sport performance right now. Like,
oh, really? Everybody's starting to look at it?
Oh man, it's like it's an abundance. Like there's courses coming out left and right about how you use it at the highest level
way
athletes.
too early.
Makes us feel good. Doesn't that make you feel good a little bit, dude?
So it is.
It's a little bit.
Early adopter.
ISOs are like they are the bee's knees right now, and for great reason. I mean, you look at you guys familiar with FRC, functional range of conditioning? Like their pails and rails is deriven from 80s research. Research that was done in the 80s. And I was like, why didn't we just keep looking at that and just apply it in different ways? You look at pails and rails and you're like, that's just an IMTP or an overcoming ISO and a yielding ISO. So why can't we apply those same principles globally or even more specific? So I like using isometrics in the frontal plane. And I know a lot of people like I like overcoming ISOs to potentiate, like Jesus, like overcome it. Like, so what I mean by
so you mean like driving against an immovable object.
Correct. And so like that's going to create. I mean, there's no more motor unit recruitment in a single lift than a failed deadlift.
Yeah.
And what is a failed deadlift? An isometric.
Yeah.
So there's your answer. Like if you want to create the most amount of force, an overcoming ISO. Now how we do it is through more of like a more favorable position. So it's like a quarter squat position. That's when I'm in my strongest. You know, I wouldn't do it from the bottom unless I'm trying to build a lift, which
like a power lifter whose bottom is weakest.
Not a basketball player.
Not a basketball player. Like who cares, right? Like,
and he's never getting in a deep squat, so it doesn't matter.
For sure. Now, what I would do if they are symptomatic, like say like patellar tendonitis on a knee, then you could get them in those ranges, but you're doing it for a health spectrum. So that's when I utilize yielding isometrics, which means, for example, you start at the top of a squat or a lunge, and then you drop into a mid stance or to a full lunge because you're yielding that force. So that's where you can utilize like heavy resistance training for that. And once again, going back to the same example, regress the exercise. Like it doesn't have to be a complicated exercise. It could even be a machine. It's just that's the vessel doesn't matter. It's the stress that we're trying to drive. And if it's heavy, well, let's not make it more complicated, especially if you don't know the athlete's training history or you don't have a long time with that athlete. Get that through motor skill, like motor learning. Like get that through like skill development. Get that through like sprinting and jumping and change direction. Don't get that in the weight room.
Okay, so with isometrics, especially with the where you're overcoming, right? So you're pushing against an immovable object or squatting against an immovable object. For the average person, it sounds like the best time to do something like that would be if you're going to do a traditional strength training workout, 45-minute hour workout would be 10 minutes at the beginning, get everything turned on, then get into your workout. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd say after you're pretty loose and you feel good, that's when you can start ramping it up. Like I would never like start the session, or even when I'm loose, I wouldn't start with like 100% effort, rip into a rack. You know, you can build at 80, 90, and then eventually start hitting your work sets. But what I really like doing is I like contrasting that work. I like going against an immovable object and then getting that tension, this is for an analogy standpoint, get the tension out of my body. Then I go do something rhythmic and coordinated after. For example, like shadow boxing is not a bad example, but like little like low level plyos or like box jumps or death drop jumps, you know, something where it involves some rhythm and coordination. So I can develop all this tension and I'll go use that tension.
Interesting.
So I like having both of those aspects. I rarely train one without the other.
Interesting.
So you could do like a high tension in the beginning after you're warmed up and loose, and then do something like ice skaters or
100%. So that's a great example of the change of direction. Well, I do an overcoming ISO into a wall, except one of my sides is facing it. And then I lean into it and I'm only pushing with my back leg. So now it's like a ice skater jump, but I'm just creating it with a wall and I'm holding that position. Now I'm specifically training the angles. Angles is what wins. Angles is what performance truly is. When you see shin angles low to the ground, you see speed. You see that in linear sprinting and you see in change of direction. So I want to train them in those angles. And what's the safest way to get them down there, but also have a shit ton of load? Overcoming isometrics.
And for the listener who's trying to understand this, the reason why angles are so important is if you're generating, I'm just going to use a number, 100 pounds worth of force, but your angle is not perfect, you're going to lose. There's a leak in that energy. That 100 pounds can't be applied directly because it's like me pushing against the wall, but I'm pushing from under the wall, right? I'm not going to push it directly. I'm not able to create the angle that gives me the direct force.
Well, there's also physics involved, right? The
Yeah.
greater the angle and the greater the strength you can have in that angle, the greater tension
That's
and
it.
that you can create on the field or on the court. I
Right.
mean, that's so.
Well, I just reverse engineer from the best in the world, right? 100-meter sprinters are the fastest people in the world.
Yep.
When you watch them take off, how close are their shins to the ground in those first 3 steps? That is the difference between good starters and elite starters. Look at those shin angles. If it looks almost parallel to the ground, it's organized falling. Like your best
yeah,
sprint,
it is.
your best sprint is catching yourself falling.
It is. Yeah.
And so great track coaches, they actually encourage falling in their acceleration drills. Because that's essentially the angle you want to be able to eventually create, because that's all it is. It's just organized falling.
Yeah, our
Interesting.
mutual friend Paul Fabritz does great videos on where he breaks down
Paul's
the angles and stuff like that.
Yes.
Have you seen the
1000%.
most elite athletes have that ability to like,
And
it's
then,
like,
now linear is one thing, but back to the point you're bringing, change of direction.
Yeah.
When you see like bilateral and then knees are in and they're just shimmying left and right, but their shins are about to touch the ground, you're like, how do you guard that? I'm just, bro, length. I just got to use length. I hope I got a 7-foot wingspan because
grab onto his shorts.
100% foul hard, foul hard.
So one of the biggest travesties in the strength sports, and we can even include, I guess, muscle building in that, is this camps like, well, bodybuilders train like this, powerlifters train like this, Olympic lifters train like this. Oh, I use kettlebells, or I use, and I don't know if we said this off air, but you said, I try to take from everything and apply it. And this is for professional sports. I think this applies to the average person as well, who just wants to build an aesthetic physique, that they don't take principles from other strength sports or even athletes in those sports like bodybuilders. I think bodybuilders can learn a lot from Olympic lifters. Maybe not the Olympic lifts,
Right.
but maybe the microdosing and the
Well,
frequency.
Sal, you're driving towards something I wanted to ask Corey actually, and if you can, I'd like you to take yourself out of your NBA and basketball mind and actually kind of think like we have to think as like general pop, right? And what are some things that you've learned during your training career that you now would apply to the average person who's just trying to get fit, build muscle? Like how would you think like programming differently today with all your
What
knowledge
do you
and
keep
experience?
and what do you omit?
Well, like back to Sal's point, like I think what's like fascinating is truly stealing from all these other disciplines. So for example, if I want massive quads, Olympic lifters have fucking quads.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
their quad sweeps are unreal. What do they do a lot of? Front squats. Boom, there you go. Application.
Yeah.
That's a great example. Sprinters have glutes and hams. Why? Because they sprint.
Yeah.
So I would apply sprinting to general population or ways to create a lot of force. Now, there is skill to sprinting, but there is no skill to throwing a medicine ball really hard. And so that's where, going back to the or the points we were making earlier, just regressing the exercises to get the adaptation you're looking for, that's what matters the most. An Olympic lifter, yes, it's a very specialized movement to be able to organize to lift that weight over their head. But I can still create that same kind of force with a trap bar.
Yep.
Maybe I don't rack it so I don't decapitate myself with a trap bar, but I can still put that same kind of force, that triple extension. I'm pulling as rapid and violently as possible to have that same adaptation. So things that I would take away from all my experiences in basketball and so apply it to general population is like extensive low-level plyometrics. So just something as simple as skipping rope. Like I want to see 30 minutes nonstop. Like if you can work up to something like that, then you won't run into the problems that I've ran into in my career with my own body. Is when I transitioned out of basketball, I went to be a meathead, right? I wanted to be bigger, faster, stronger. And so in that process, I got away from doing any type of plyometrics. I got away from hooping. I got away from anything that made me athletic. So what I did was I built a body that can write checks that my feet can't cash. And then boom, torn
That
Achilles.
speaks right to me, bro.
And you know what I'm saying? And then now, so in my evolution, I was like 226 the last time I talked to you guys. Actually, that's so funny. 3 days after I tore my Achilles, I came in here and did that podcast
Yeah,
with you
that's
guys.
right.
Yeah.
So I rolled it in. I was so high off pain meds too. That was crazy. I was worried about that. I was really worried about that podcast. I ain't gonna
You're
lie.
still sharp though.
Yeah, you were good.
But he's real happy.
He's super happy. But what's happened since that time is my left Achilles is healed. Everything's great. But now my right Achilles And that's generally what you see. When you see one go, the other tends to follow suit. Mine is because of a deformity in my heel. So my Achilles sits obliquely. And so I'm just creating this shear force all the time. But there's a said principle to it where if you train it up, it will eventually get stronger. And so what I found out is, okay, I have a 226 body. I like being awesome, but I can't move. Now that I'm in professional sports, I'm more valued by moving, not by looking apart.
Right.
Yeah.
And when I look at the rest of the league, I'm like, there's no meatheads here. Like, I was like, oh, that might be a reason.
Yeah.
And so because I have a background in basketball, I can be involved a lot more. Like in college, I couldn't even hold a basketball or else it's a violation, which is wild.
Oh,
There's
interesting.
So many NCAA rules. That's ridiculous.
That is weird.
Yeah. But it's like the reason why they did it is because then you could just make an assistant coach a strength coach. And now you have another coach.
Okay.
So that's why they did it. But in professional sports, I can pass, I can shoot, I can, set a screen, I can do all sorts of stuff. So my ability to move is what gets guys to buy in. Like my ability to handle the ball, like And1 mixtape, like the stuff that I cared about growing up. Like they're like, oh, yo, like
Shout out to And1,
Corey's got some stuff, and it's like, oh, I might actually listen to him in the weight room now. So, anyways, where were we going?
Low
with
level
that?
plyos.
Oh, low level plyos. So the first thing I had to do though was, okay, you can't be 226 anymore. Because like, let's just say I'm a Ferrari, which I'm not, but like I'm a Ferrari. Well, I just put a trailer on that Ferrari. So what do you think is going to happen to it?
Yeah.
You're just hauling around all this mass and it's not going to let you move better. So I've been in this journey over the past like 6 months of just losing as much like even good mass so that I can have a more efficient body. And then, man, have I been hitting extensive plyometrics like you wouldn't believe.
God, this is what I struggle with so bad. So I want to get back to playing basketball. I miss the sport so much.
But he
Even
likes to be beefy.
but I like saying he buff.
But like,
athletically.
but it was an ego dragon.
Yeah, I know,
that
I know.
There were some things that I was able to slay it. I was finally able to slay it, and once I slayed it, I took a step back, and I'm like, all right, like this is my new journey. My new journey is Jason Statham, Ryan Gosling. Like that's my new journey. I can get there.
Well,
can get
I mean,
there.
plyos and that kind of movement's a skill, and your body forgets it if you don't. This happened to me. It was like a while ago. I was joking about with these guys on the podcast. I went to cross the street. Some cars were coming, so I had to run. Yeah. And as I'm running, I'm like, oh,
feel
I
like a
forgot how to
robot.
run. And it's because I never do.
Right.
It's a skill. Again, back to training. Olympic lifting I find fascinating because it's got to be the most studied and scientifically applied programming in strength sports, probably because it's been nations competing against nations for a long time. Did you ever look at the old Soviet era studies that came out with a lot of them now everybody knows because the Iron Curtain came down.
Right.
Any interesting things you read out of there that you've applied, or is it
High
just
frequency training.
Yeah, that's the biggest one.
That's the big one. High frequency training, and like speed strength, like the aspect of speed strength. So to catch up the audience, like you have absolute velocity, which is sprinting and jumping, strength or speed strength, where you're lifting light weights really, really fast, strength speed, where you're lifting moderate weights very, very fast, and then relative strength or max strength, where you're just grinding through a squat or a deadlift. So I like living more towards speed strength, and I think it's going to create a better body, like even aesthetically. For instance, like I do lighter cleans, but I put so much more force into the ground and snatches as well that I'm like, oh, my upper back feels different now. Like, oh, I was just trying to grind up a snatch, which you're like, oh, Jesus, like that's the last thing you should do. Like I just jumped over that whole value of speed strength. But now like I have an upper back that can probably handle more strength speed weight, but at similar velocities.
Interesting. Looking forward, do you see any? Do you have any predictions for any strength training trends that maybe isn't so widely utilized right now?
Calisthenics.
Really?
I think calisthenics is going to make a big splash.
So like closed chain movements.
So like guys that do like the crazy like rings.
Yeah.
And they do all the like the bar pull ups and all these different means, like the human flag.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a trend towards that.
Now,
That's
why?
what I'm fascinated with it personally. Now, I could be biased because this is where I think the trend is going, but I think accessibility is going to be the new thing. And what I'm finding out, look at COVID. COVID shut down a bunch of gyms. Gyms are back open. Now, you guys can speak more to this expertise than I can because I don't understand the general population as well. But, I mean, you tell me, did home fitness grow tremendously?
Oh, yeah.
Did your guys' programs go through the roof?
Our
Like,
home programs.
you know what I'm saying? And I'm like, accessibility is going to be the new thing. And that's where it's like, what do I have access to more often? And if you're doing, for instance, microdosing, well, you don't want to go to the commercial gym 3 times a day.
That's right. That's
And
a very good
so
point.
I want more accessibility, and I think calisthenics can cover a lot of that.
Yeah.
So you don't think all the NBA teams are going to adopt tonal? Is that what's not going?
Bro, I built a piece of equipment to fight tonal.
Did you really?
So I built. Oh man, this is crazy. Actually, have you ever? Man, you can go through my social. And
I've seen what you built.
Saw that box.
Yeah,
That
cool,
thing's
dude.
serious.
It is,
So I
and it's
built
sick.
it because of professional sports. So the craziest thing is my first half season. I'm looking around, and we travel to every city in America basically. And we're in these arenas, and I'm like, we only have access to power blocks and a Swiss ball. These are the best athletes in the world, and this is all they get access to. And of course, if we're microdosing, that's a big deal, because what all can I do with power blocks? I can do a lot, but I mean, come on, guys, like 82 games of power blocks, like that's a lot. And it's not going to be enough load either. So I was like, what am I going to do? Also on that note, guys would miss you if they want to. So for instance, logistics is a big issue. So in other words, let's say we're in the Midwest at a very specific organization, and they have their weight room on the other side of the arena, or we're in the North and they have their weight room basically on the third story. So you have to go through fans to get to it. That's a big problem. And athletes are going to go, no, I'm not doing that. And I agree with them. There's a safety issue there. I wouldn't do that either. Yeah. So when I think about that, I go, well, where can they not miss me? And I was like, oh, on the court. And I was like, I want to set up the weight room on the baseline, and they can't miss me there. And so it started off with just a plyo box. Like I was like, okay, we'll do some plyometrics. We'll do some altitude drops. We'll do some concentric box jumps. And then it started growing. Okay, we'll have a med ball. We'll do some other things. Okay, well, I need more load. So I need a landmine. Like a landmine would be a good versatile use. Well, okay, I need that. Well, I'm really getting into this Franz Bosch stuff. So I want a ramp. And so after all that time, I was like, let's build something. And so I was able to partner with some people, and we built this gym in a box.
Oh, interesting.
It's crazy, man. It's all these things fit inside the box, and we roll that thing in and out, put it on the plane, like it goes up the conveyor belt, comes off, and it's crazy. So we set this thing up on the baseline. Guys run through it before their shooting routine. So about 2 hours to an hour before the game, they go through their movement preparation. We call it our tune-up sessions. And some of them actually ask, like, there's some stress. Like, there's some high velocity stuff. There's some high level plyometrics. And then certain guys actually, they experience a lot of load, and then they go onto the court, go through their shooting routine. And so when you have 82 of those opportunities in a regular season, that's a lot of opportunities to get better. And so that's what I look at it as. I'm like, I'm trying to make a better athlete by the time we get to playoffs. So we talk about the strength response adaptation aspect, like get stronger as the season goes. Well, I don't only want that. I also want a better moving athlete going into the playoffs. Yeah. And so that's where you have 82 opportunities of that. And then post game, if we're on the road, we just set it up in the back and we're training.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, it's wild.
Now,
man.
before we got on air, you were sharing with us just how litigious the NBA is, and like what you can and can't say and all the stuff like that. So I'm curious, and you can say you can't say anything if you can't, but I see something like, and I can say this, so I'm going to say it first, and then you can whatever you can. I see someone like LeBron James promote tonal. That was where the jab came from, right? I threw that jab at that, like, it promotes that. And this motherfucker is not using that. And if he is, his strength coach probably needs to get fired for that. Are those, and so what does that put those coaches in? And kind of be like, can they not comment on that? Can you even comment on that? Are they like, what's the deal?
I'll say this. There's a lot of ways that I want to comment on it. I will say two things. One, Mike Mancias, which is LeBron's guy. He's an amazing human being. He's probably one of my favorite people in the NBA. The dude's like, he's been with him ever since he was like, he started out. Oh, wow. But as a human, I love him to death. And then second, I plead the fifth.
That's enough said for me right there. You know what I'm saying? But I would imagine like how difficult that would have to be to navigate that, because now you're messing with people's money, right? I mean, he's heavily invested in that.
Well, I mean, it's not that different than these athletes being sponsored by candy and fast food and stuff like that, which I'm sure they have some here and there, but at that level, you're not going to be eating I don't know, maybe you are, but I'm sure
No,
a
that's
lot
not
of them
true. I mean, they just remember the big old controversy with DK Metcalf came out because he talked about what he ate, like, and there was all this controversy about him eating so shitty and stuff like that. Did you
Yeah.
guys see that?
Marshawn
Yeah, I
Lynch
did see that.
Skittles.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
yeah.
you know, man, it goes both ways. Though.
Yeah.
It goes both ways.
I mean, I feel like training is like the thing. I think it's more about training that's a little more, to me, more controversial. And maybe that's just because
I agree.
This is our space.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah, I'm just like, come on, dude. Because now what happens is like there's a ton of kids that think that if I buy this piece of equipment and I use this, maybe I'll be
Bro,
in
it's
shape.
I mean all sport. I mean look at bodybuilders, you know. I'm massive because I take, you know, super
oh yeah, Chuck Norris.
Yeah.
Come on, like Chuck Norris, really? With the, you know, like, it's the same thing.
I forgot about his.
What was
He
that thing
crushed,
you
dude.
used?
He crushed
Dude, the
that.
Total Gym, right?
No,
The
no,
Total
no.
Gym.
Yeah,
I
was
think
it called the Total Gym?
You ever use one?
I have.
I've used one. It's
It was
actually pretty
interesting,
smooth.
actually.
Dude, it's a
Yeah.
Pilates machine at
is.
an incline.
It
That's
is.
all it is, bro.
Exactly what it
That's
is. It's
100%.
the Pilates
That's
Which was
machine.
brilliant. though.
Number one.
He crushed. Can you look at Doug? How much did he make off that? How much
A
did Chuck
lot.
Norris make off the Total
I
Gym?
need
I
to
mean,
know this, too.
He
not as
crushed.
much as the
ThighMaster is the
Thighmaster.
number one. You know that's the number
Dude,
one
they
selling piece
crushed.
of exercise equipment of all time.
I hate my
For a
career.
spring.
I got like, what am I doing? Like,
exactly. I got out of
create
that
something.
whole. I'm going to build something business.
I know. It's like-
yeah,
what about resistance bands? I saw that out of favor, totally in favor. You know, strength athletes didn't use them, and power lifters use them. Now bodybuilders are starting to use them.
Yeah.
What about with you guys? Do you use resistance bands at all?
I love bands to create higher stressors.
Okay.
I hate mini bands. I think mini bands should be.
What are mini bands?
Those are the smaller rubber band
Oh.
or bands that you put around your knees and you do your ThighMaster exercises
yeah.
with. And that is a plague in professional sports. Like you see guys wrap that on, like, oh, I feel my glute, and you're like, yeah, but there's not enough load to do that. Like that's not creating any.
Oh, I'm so glad you
They're
touched
doing
on that
the
because I've been
bikini
shitting on
model
those things
workouts?
for
Is
so
that
long.
It's so bad. Like I see that stuff, and then of course, you know, athletes in both sectors, college and professional sports, you see like this is part of my routine, and I'm like, that sucks. I don't know what else to say. Like,
I mean, you see it. I saw it explode during my years of competing in the bodybuilding world. With bikini athletes, it became like every girl in the gym was squatting with bands around their knees. I thought
Dude,
this is so
that's-
stupid.
They're better off
like
putting bands on the
comboing it.
bar and giving themselves resistance.
exactly. I love that, and that's how I would use them. I use them in like powerlifting
Yes.
scenarios. Man, I love reverse bands.
Yes.
Oh my god, do I reverse band athletes to the cows come home?
Really?
Because it gets them deep.
Yes.
Like sometimes they don't know they can go deep. I kid you not. There's guys that I've had in the past, and I won't say rather as in college or professional sports, but they put 315 on their back and they're like, and I go quarter, and I'm looking at this guy, I'm like, dude, you're 250, like lean. Like what are you talking about? Like, and then you give them a reverse band and they're going 450
yeah.
all the way to the bottom.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay. So now you've experienced this. Sometimes it's a neck up thing. You experience it. Well, let's take off that band. All right, now you're hitting 405. Like word,
It's-
like
I
that
think-
was the change.
I think it's like a neural, like it's like almost like your body has to learn the movement, or you have to get the confidence.
Well, I think it's a safety. It's a governor.
Yes.
It's a governor
Yes.
in your
Totally.
brain. Because I look at it, and that's why I love altitude drops. And for those who don't know what an altitude drop is, you're standing on top of a plyo box and you literally just drop down. You stand on top of a box, drop, stick the landing. Now get higher. Now get higher. Now get higher. That you get to a point where you get high and you're like, I don't know about this. But when we were growing up and we jumped over fences,
Oh, yeah.
right? We jumped off the second story of our house or off the roof of our house. Like you can looking at those like parkour athletes, how they absorb force. Now in a sport
roll out of it.
performance, heck yeah, this stuff's awesome. But in a sports performance aspect, if you land in a jumping movement, you're just reverse engineering a jump. Now that is a lot of eccentric load. Wow, what a great way to
I didn't even think that
yeah,
you would.
no, that's
So
smart.
how far will you push that? Because I mean, you think of a guy, like John Morant, who's flying through the air. I mean, that dude looks sometimes like he's 6 feet off the ground or whatever. And training him to be able to drop down from something that's pretty high. How high would you take somebody?
I look at knee displacement. And so what knee displacement is how much your knee bends.
Okay.
So, and then here's where you get into the weeds, how the structure of the athlete. So you look at the guys that look like they barely bend their knees, but they fly through the air. They look like they're just so stiff, but they're off the ground. Those guys create force differently than say like,
Interesting.
you've seen like the bodybuilder, like this dude's jacked, but does the backflip.
Yeah.
Okay.
Juju Mufu.
Yeah.
He does. That's a different
Brent Castleberry.
strategy. His strategy is muscularly driven. He's not stiff when he does it. So what he does is he uses a large full range of motion, deep squat, into that backflip. High level athletes do that, but with a 1/4 of an inch bend in their knees. And that's the difference, because it takes a longer time to create that same amount of force. That's what, tendinous athletes, you watch knee displacement. So if they bend their knees a lot when they land, you're like, okay, that's a good thing. Like, we want them to be able to do that. That's building strength for them.
Since we're going in the weeds, does that mean that shorter muscle belly? So in bodybuilding, you want long muscle bellies. You want short tendons, long muscle bellies. Does that mean in sports, short muscle bellies is more beneficial?
I think so. I mean, that's what I've seen.
Yeah.
You've seen it before, like where long Achilles, small little calves up top, boing. Those guys are freaks. So I just look at it like that.
Okay. Now back to the resistance bands or the, one thing I noticed with those is I can add a lot of load with those. Does not hammer my body if I use an equal amount of load with just weights. Do you think there's a different? It just feels that way to me. I mean, I can even use chains, which is progressive resistance, or as I'm lifting the weight. But chains still hammer my body more than bands. Bands, I feel
more
like
continuous, and
I'm not sure.
I think it's mechanical tension.
Okay,
right. So like chains, it's still load on the bar. It just deloads. With bands, it's so much of an exponential decrease in mechanical tension at the bottom. Like if you got heavy bands up there, I mean, sometimes it's like up to 200 pounds at the bottom that's off. So at the end of the day, when it comes to like how you feel, you got to look at it's got to be mechanical load.
It has to be. I know, Adam, you were doing them the other day on the incline because I had them set up. It just feels so different.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why. And that's why it's different than chains. Is it's helping out a lot more when you're all the way at that bottom like that.
So man, does it feel great?
Yeah,
man,
no,
it's interesting.
As much as an ego lift it is, I look at it like this, but you still experience full range of motion.
Yes.
And then when do you actually need to feel that kind of strength out of the bottom? Now, is there a health perspective of doing a full range of motion squat without bands? Absolutely. But when we're talking both ends of the spectrum on health and performance, well, why do you think powerlifters use it to begin with? To overload the top.
Well, I also think, to your point about the governors and that it being from the neck up, like I remember it, and it was, obviously these guys weren't smart enough to probably really know. They were just trained to do this. I lifted with this was one of my early 20s, and I couldn't even squat 225 or bench press 225 at this time. I'm a real young, skinny kid. And they would get me under the squat bar with 315. But they just they would say, I just want your body just needs to feel it. Yeah, unrack it. Just feel it. Your body needs to feel that weight. It needs to feel that weight. And I'm like, this is crazy. It's like 100 pounds more than I can even do. Why are we doing this?
They're right, though.
They were.
They're right.
And I totally remember that. Then I'd go throw something like 275, which seems so big for me, then I could do it. Same thing with the bench press. We do the same thing. So there has to be something about that from the head up of just getting comfortable with holding that much weight, and having the bands to kind of assist in that situation, I think is massive, right?
Well, now take that to jumping, and that's the point of the altitude drop. When you get up high enough, you go, I don't know if I can land this. And that's the moment of, okay, this is where you need to be. And then let's add stiffness to that. So let's just say, let's throw some numbers at it, like a 24-inch box. All right, 24-inch box, it's like, I don't know, for whoever is trying this experiment. And then they do it, and they're like, okay, I did it. Okay, now let's do it with purpose. You're not just surviving it. Okay, let's do it, but really absorb, like compress as much as you want, have a big knee displacement. So in other words, squat deep when you land it.
Do you have a cue? I have a cue for that. Quiet feet. Quiet feet.
Quiet feet. I like that.
Yeah,
I like that a lot.
Okay, so
steal that. Actually.
Yeah, no, that's a quiet
I use
feet.
it for sprinting a lot, so that's fun.
Yeah, I'm like, I try and when I used to tell clients, I'm like, try and make no noise.
I like.
Can you land and make no noise?
I
and
like
it just
that.
registers for them,
But that is so muscularly driven. So like, I mean, I'm telling you, you do high velocity eccentrics, you are just as sore as if you did like crazy amounts of volume bodybuilding. So when you're working through that full range, I'm just working at a different velocity than I am with like a traditional lift. Now, the aspect of getting more athletic, okay, now I want you to be on that 24-inch box, same deal. Now do it with barely bending your knees. And then that's athleticism. The ones that can stick and stiff. Now, stiffness is health and performance all in one, because the stiffness is what's training the tendons. Like I'm training for tendon and ligament strength and development. But that's on the health side. But on the performance side, that reactivity, that small knee displacement is what's going to allow me to create more force faster. Everyone can create a lot of force in professional sports. Who can create it the fastest? That's really what matters. That's what wins.
Yeah, and one thing that I was thinking as you were talking about moving from higher to higher box and saying, ooh, can I do that? And then be like, ooh, I did that. Let me go to a higher one. I think a lot of people forget this. There's feedback that goes to your CNS that's also you being afraid.
Yes.
Or you feeling confident. I mean, there's stories of athletes hitting PRs because they misloaded the bar. So they thought,
Right.
this is almost my
yes.
max.
Yes.
That's a true story. I think there actually in the Olympics that happened where somebody actually hit a world record because they thought the bar was loaded lighter than it actually was. So there's that too.
That's the best part about like Olympic lift or like colored bumpers. Hey, don't worry about what it is. And that's what I love about kilos. Don't worry about what it
they're
is.
trying to do the math.
It's
I'm
red,
just saying
blue,
the
green.
kilos, yeah.
No one cares. It's red, blue, green. How much is that? Red, blue, green. Like just
How
do
much it is.
I'll take care of the
We'll
weight.
calculate it later. And all of a sudden they smoke it and you're like, red, blue, green. Like, yeah. So that to your point, yeah. Now apply that with sprinting. So how would you do that? Over speed training. So that means make them run faster than what they actually can.
How?
How the hell did you do that?
Great question.
Tie them to a
So
car?
there's-
No, you know you do. Yeah.
I mean, essentially, yes, yes. But there's a device that allows you to do that. There's two companies. One's called 1080 Sprint, and the other one's called Dynaspeed. But essentially, what it is, it's like tonal. Believe it or not, it's electromagnetic resistance. But think of it as like a fishing rod, so like a spool.
So it
Right.
pulls you?
It pulls you
Oh, that's
towards
hilarious.
the device. Now, traditionally you're using it to go away from the device. It's like
Yes.
a speed rocket, right? So like you're running away from it, or like you're running with a sled behind you, you're running with chains behind
Parachute
you.
or whatever.
Right. So resistant sprinting. Well, with this particular device, now you can run towards it and it makes you run faster. So
And then you learn that.
you learn, you self-organize. So now that you're self-organizing at faster velocities, people
I gotta
can
see
run
this.
That
How
makes
many
sense.
athletes have eaten shit?
People can
doing that?
run not many.
Really?
Not many, because what you do is you just rip the cord. Like if you're really like that scared, or you change your strategy and you actually do.
What's the name of this? I want Doug to pull it up. I want to see. I want to see a visual example. Yeah, what's it called?
There's
sounds
Dyna
fascinating.
Speed.
I like how you said pull by your
DYNA.
card. You were almost on point, bro.
And
I was like, this motherfucker's not going to tell me right now. He pulls
we're not
fucking
gonna-
cards.
Tie a chain.
We're not going to do this outside this freaking rover, bro.
Yeah,
We're
but
not
we got to pull it with their car. So Lambo.
Yeah,
we got to make this look awesome. But there's Dynaspeed. But I think 1080 Sprint. They actually have more videos. that
That's
you
so
can actually see.
interesting. I didn't even know a tool existed like this.
It's really, really cool.
No,
Yeah.
so this makes perfect sense.
Of course it
because-
makes sense, but
like,
it sounds
I've done
crazy.
everything from running in pools to I was working with the San Jose City track team, and they had everything was in that direction, that vein of like having a parachute behind you.
resist.
Right.
This
Resist.
is actually
Never
assisting you to go
thought
fast.
But
about
what do you-
this
but
direction.
Ain't that reverse bands?
Yes.
It's the same concept.
Holy shit. It
Yeah,
is.
it's-
You know what's funny is that
Oh, so it's it's way.
yeah, it's pulling them. So this makes sense, and I feel like this is the last frontier in training where
Bro, this is brilliant.
it's about it's less about can I create more force and more strength, which we've known, and we know a lot about that already. But this is more about can I teach the body to organize itself
Bingo.
in a better, more efficient way than it already is, and the way you do it is you assist. And you put it in that position so it's forced to.
We do it in weightlifting. Why don't we
this
do it
is
at high
so
velocity?
fascinating.
This
I
makes
can't believe I didn't even know this existed.
Absolute
But
perfect sense.
that's what we do with altitude drops. It's the same
Yes.
idea.
Yes.
It's higher than what you could ever land.
Corey, how long has this been around?
Ooh, good question. I have no idea.
I mean, how long have you known about it then?
So I've known about it for 5 years, but I've only been in the position where I can afford it this past 2 years. So there's a difference. It's pretty expensive.
Wow, what a-
well, I mean,
that
it
is
how cool.
I mean, can you separate the psychology from the physiology?
I don't think so.
It's the
I think
you
it's all
can't.
in the same.
It's all in the same.
And
Absolutely.
That's another aspect that's like when we especially me, like when you train to be this guy
Yeah.
for so long, all that compression. Well, that goes into your psychology too. And the thing that I've realized the most is when I got away from that, I'm like, be more elastic, reactive, be smooth, rhythmic, like be able to dance and be able to move. Like all of a sudden, like
Fast and loose.
I'm like so much more relaxed.
Oh,
like I
wow.
don't have all this built up tension. Like I walk smoother. I don't get up and grunt. Like that's the thing that I noticed when I sat
thought
down.
that's
I
just
was-
'cause I'm getting
It's just
older.
the old trait, right?
I thought it was old, but that is tension. And it's like,
Yeah.
how do you create tension? If I spend all my time creating tension like this, how do you think that
Next time you see us, we're all going to be all hell lean. We're all skinny.
mind pump is
Inspired.
now mind lean? You know?
No, you know, it's funny when you said make you run faster. I thought of, do you remember the movie Kickboxer with Jean-Claude Van Damme, where the
Absolutely.
trainer it straps a piece of steak to his leg? He's like, "What's that for? Make you run faster."
Make you run.
That's the dog out.
Yeah,
That's right.
This will make run faster. This? How?
Well, I have you, so I want to ask more NBA questions just because I'm such a huge NBA fan. So, when you're watching, and I love hearing from your perspective because you have a trainer mind like ours, and I think that when I look at athletes, there's a certain thing that I like even more. Like take their personality, even maybe how good of a shooter where they are. Like just when I see something crazy athletic. For example, I dropped Ja Morant. Like when I watch that kid play, I'm like in
Specimen.
awe.
Yeah.
Just in awe of what he physically can do on the court. How often does that happen to you where you're is every game or does your jaw drop? Does it always happen when you see a certain player? Like tell me like that your experience of seeing that and like maybe even some names of people that like just blow your mind when you see them play.
I'll say this, I always get that every game, but I get it in different ways. Sometimes it's through raw athleticism and you're just like, oh my God, like how's the body physically capable of doing that? And then when you get to the skill side, and you just see like, oh my God, people don't even understand how hard that floater was.
Oh yeah.
Like because when you're there and you see like how the play develops,
Like flying to the side on like
like the play calling, like everyone knows what's about to happen and they still can't stop it. When you watch stuff like that, or when you're reading eyes, that's the greatest part about being so close. When you see like look-offs and you see like they know the play, they know these guys are exchanging and they don't even have to watch, and all of a sudden that ball goes in that direction, hits them right in the chest, and you're just like, oh my God, like I can't even make that like chest pass, like directly looking at you eye to eye, and I can't even be that precise. And they're doing it over screens, like over their left shoulder, opposite hand or non-dominant hand. And you're just like, oh my goodness. So that's the thing that it's like, it's from a physical perspective, absolutely. But the skill.
And now, are there certain guys that you see more of that from? Like when you've played against certain teams or guys on your team, and they're like, man, I mean, you got Chris Paul. I mean, one of the most beautiful passers to ever play the game. Like
he's special.
Yeah.
I look at it like this: the technical execution is probably the most fascinating thing you'll ever witness, ever, especially from him.
Yeah.
Like, the technical execution is just fascinating. People that really blow me away, I would have to say, man, would be a really good example.
And any plays that you saw this year. So I saved it because I don't want to lose. Obviously, it'll be on freaking replays forever. But I think that chase down block that Ja Morant did this year, where he grabbed the ball
At the top of the square.
is the most. And I watched someone put together a compilation of like all the blocks where someone's done that. LeBron's done that, I think, once or twice. Where it was really, I think his tops everybody.
Yeah.
The speed at which he came back to get him at, his size to be able to, at the height that he got. I mean, the coordination you need to land that, everything.
When you watch it, it's I mean, I don't know. I can't put it into words. Like, that's the greatest part about being in it. You get to see that night in and night out, just in different manifestations.
Yeah.
Like that one's just through raw physical athleticism. And that's so cool to watch. I mean, guys that I look at and I go, Jesus. It's like Kawhi Leonard. When you see him, you're like, good God, that's a man. You know, like it's just my first year in the league, it was just looking at people like just physical domination.
Oh, yeah.
Like you just look at them and you're like, oh my God, like I don't even know what like kind of human that is. Like they're not human, actually. They're just a different version of, like a more advanced version of humanity. I think Kawhi is one of them.
I mean, that's got to be to that point because he's a big dude, right? They're all big.
Yeah.
That's it. I remember being a kid watching basketball both on TV and then never being able to sit like really low to getting older and more successful in my life and actually getting down. Like, when you get down there and you actually get a chance to see like,
how
holy
much they
shit,
tower
like
over
the
you.
smallest guys
Right.
make me look like a little guy.
for sure.
And then to see what they're physically capable of doing is just like mind blowing.
You
That
don't
they're-
see them walking around in the
Kevin
grocery
Durant does
store.
whatever he does.
Yeah.
Just anything Kevin Durant does is very special.
Right.
I have an interesting question. So they just now allowed at the college level to be able to get like sponsorships and all that. And like, I just thought that was so disruptive. And obviously you're not in that setting anymore, but like, I just want to hear your opinion on it. And also like how you'd have thought you'd been able to like manage that in terms of like the players and athletes.
I don't think I would have been able to manage it. Like
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm removed from the early stages of it. If I ever revisit it, I hope it's like a little bit more
Ironed out.
organized
Yeah.
because right now it's the wild
Chaos,
west.
right?
Like it's unbelievable and the money is ridiculous and the accountability is low. Like that's the part that it's like it's a little iffy, you know, like you can get all that money at one time. Like maybe like, unless they do like payment plans or however they do it, like you can do like, here's $500,000 done. And then, you know what? My ankle's hurt. There could be like, you know, they like, you know, I don't, you know, after this season, I'm going to go to West Virginia. And you're like, what? Like, what just happened? So like, I don't think there's enough policing in this one because they just don't, it's not organized yet. It's just the Wild Wild West. I'm glad I'm not involved.
Do you speculate that they're going to use this as a way to still pay college athletes without for old ways of doing it?
I mean, no, the old ways are just now legal.
Right.
That's all it is.
That's what I mean. So it's like basically. So do you think it just opened that door to basically
it's just like,
legalize
here it
it?
is. Like
USC got in trouble for, like, you don't think?
Because what's to stop me? Like, let's say I was a Duke alumni.
Right.
I'm loaded, and I'm part of the inner circle of, you know, handing cash bags to players for decades already. I'm an old dude.
I didn't get a picture of you doing it.
Well,
He looks like a guy with that.
now this has opened the door. So what's to stop me from starting my, you know, own toothbrush line? And I'm at my own brand. I have an LLC I started up, and really the only reason why I have it is so I can sponsor
This
this.
some shell company.
Like, but for real, like I think that's what you can do, and I think that's what's been done.
Of course.
I just don't. Man,
Because I mean, if Nike can do it now, if any like, why can't I?
that's where I think you're going to find like a lot of independent people come up, and start their stuff, and it's going to be on, you know, the backs of talent, you know, just like in any other industry. It's just interesting how it's going to manifest. I just wonder, especially in the college, like how the divisions are now happening. Like teams are leaving conferences,
Yeah.
and it's now going to the highest bidder. So now I wonder what this shakeup's going to look like. It's basically professional sports, but it's more like semi-league. For like the Big 12's now humongous, the Big 10, and now the Pac-12 is now dwindling down. So I'm like, is Pac-12 now going to be like a mid-major? And it's all about the TV deals, and there's so much money into it. It's going to get really, really interesting.
Well, it's, you know, Sal and I listened to a podcast called the All In Podcast. These four billionaire dudes, and one of the things they're talking about is they believe in the. I don't think he said the next 20 years. Did he say like no big brands are going to exist anymore?
No, yeah, it's
20. So
yeah,
like,
it's the democratization of media. He says if you want to sell something in the next 20, 30 years, you have to produce content.
Yeah.
Well, and
they
that
use
just
the example of influencers like Kim Kardashian launching lines,
sure.
becoming a billionaire, and
For sure.
that one died. Mr. Beast did like a
Beast,
burger
yeah.
shop.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
10 or 20,000 people showed up at its opening.
I mean,
huge.
it's what we do, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's the same deal. It's just, you know, we're not
It's
Kim K.
decentralized.
well, yeah, no, it's but it's really going to disrupt the space as far as like brands and advertising. Because I mean, imagine if you're, and I use a stupid analogy of a toothbrush. But if I had that kind of pool and that kind of capital, what's to stop me from going and getting 40 of the biggest name college kids that are coming up and giving them some of the biggest contracts? And I could literally take a no-name toothbrush brand and turn it
Crush
into a household
right.
name out of nowhere like that.
I mean, if you got the capital, I mean, at the end of the day, do you have liquid cash?
Right,
Like,
right.
if you got the capital, do it.
Yeah.
You know, like it's all about what you want to get out there. And that's where sports has always been a leverage point for anything.
Totally.
You know, so now it's just college, you can do it.
Yeah.
You know, now I don't know how you protect brands now. Like, for instance, like let's look at an example of like an Ivy League school. How do you protect like a Harvard? You know,
right.
and then all of a sudden, like one of your athletes is an OnlyFans subscription. Like, you know, like I don't know, like how does that work? Like,
They're going to have to iron it out. And I agree with you. I think we'll figure it out in the next 10 years or so, 10, 15 years.
I think it's going to be going to be super wild.
Well, good deal, man. You're a great guest. Always a lot of fun.
thanks. I appreciate
Love
it.
picking your brain.
Yeah,
man.
one of the things I like most about you is you're really good at the science of just adaptation and strength training in particular, and you explain it very well. So really appreciate having you on the show and
Absolute
learning
pleasure,
from
man.
you.
Well, I really think of you guys as like the three horsemen in sports.
You're like our guru.
I think you, Smarzo, and Fabritz are, I think, three of the best, in my opinion, in the space that are putting out information related to sports training. And I think that it's been behind for a long time. And I remember coming across all your guys' content. I know Justin introduced us to you first, and then ironically, you guys were all friends.
Yeah.
So that's what's kind of funny. It's like we found you guys individually and then find out everybody's all connected. And of course,
Max low-key interned for me for like 2 weeks.
oh, no shit.
You gotta hold that over forever.
Yeah, I know. Just remember. Just remember, dude. Just remember
where you were.
Good stuff, brother. Good stuff.
Thanks
Good
for coming on.
Hey, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate y'all.
This one's really important, and that is to phase your training. If somebody trains for a full year doing a bench press and they're always aiming for 5 reps, if you compared that person to a person who did bench press where they did 3 or 4 weeks of 5 reps, but then they did 3 or 4 weeks of 12 reps and then 3 or 4 weeks of, let's say, 15 to 20 reps, and then they'll throw in some supersets. At the end of that year, you're going to see more consistent progress from the person who's moving in and out and less injury.